Welcome to the Fantasy Football Forge. It's Steve, your host, and I'm here today to go over one bust in every round of the draft. And it's not, okay, first of all, when we get to the later rounds, bust is going to be a very strong word for all of them. I kind of know where that line is for me on this list, so I will try to make a point to make a point of that. And also, some of these guys might be closer to avoids than busts, and so I will also try to make that line clear, at the very least, when they're an avoid player compared to being a bust player. And really what that means is I don't necessarily disagree with where they're going drafted, or I think that, yeah, they'll probably finish with those kinds of fantasy points, but I'm not feeling the vibe. One quick announcement beforehand. We have our drafts coming up. And so if you go up onto my website, here is the front page. You can scroll down and you can click right here to get my printable draft sheet to bring to your draft. If you do it in person, you can also click up on the top here on the rankings and you could click right here for it. So let's take a quick look at the draft sheet. There it is. It's nice, high quality. I know, especially depending on your connection on your side, it might not appear clear, but I did a test print of it, and it comes out as clear as any list as I've ever come across for drafting. Maybe my, commissioners always, photocopy the draft list or something. Sometimes they're really tough to read, so made a point to keep the quality up on here. Now, what I do want to point out here, so going back to my rankings here, you can get all of my up-to-date rankings. Those get updated regularly, whereas this printable draft sheet will be updated hopefully as of the time of this upload tomorrow on Thursday. Maybe that takes a little bit longer, late Thursday night, early Friday morning at the latest. I will have that updated. I will also update it once again next week going into the weekend. I have my draft on Saturday. I plan on using this draft sheet, but I will also have my rankings printed off, and you can do the same if you wish. Click there. Right up the top, you can click, you can download, you can print the rankings for each individual position. I like to have those available in part because when you look at my printable draft sheet, it is not exactly my rankings. It is a mashup of ADP and my rankings. I do that for a couple of reasons. We do a pretty good job as a community of drafting, and at the end of the day, ADP is a pretty good prediction of how good these players are going to be throughout the season. So I like it as an input into my draft sheet for draft day. The other thing is, too, is I spend so much time with this and looking at things. I know my targets. I know the players I like, so I'll move up and down on my draft board a little bit depending on that too. So with that said, let's get on into this presentation. One bust in every round of the draft. Let's go, starting off with the first round with Bijan Robinson, and you will see Travis Kelce in parentheses there. It's very close to putting Travis Kelce in here. However, I felt like as far as the term bust goes, Bijan was a closer option to me. Travis Kelce's just, he's an avoid for me in the first round. I don't recommend taking him in the first round. I'm not going to convince you otherwise if you're someone who wants to take him in the first round. Bijan Robinson, maybe I could convince you to be a little bit careful about. He is an avoid for me. I don't want to quite call him a bust because if you look at my bottom note here, top 10, yes, I think he is a top 10 running back this year. Is he a top 5? I don't think so, and here's some of the reasons. Look at the running back landscape this year. It's not a super awesome crop. We are seeing more and more backfields that are unpredictable, and I think we're going to continue to see the NFL to continue to give running backs lower percentage, less bell cow usage. This is one backfield that it is pretty loaded. We have a rookie last season in Tyler Algier who went over 1,000 yards. Yes, he had a whole lot of opportunities to get there. Hence the offense here, which is going to be a positive and a negative here for Bijan. First of all, there's a reason Bijan is being loved in this offense. They are going to be running the ball a whole lot, and volume is king. So that's great. But I do think that Tyler Algier will dip into his volume as a rusher and bring him a little bit back to earth compared to maybe some people's expectations. And I think that Cordell Patterson will eat into his receiving workload a little bit and help to just take some of that top edge off of where I think people are expecting him to have that edge. And then you think about the offense with Desmond Ridder helming it. And this is the reason that I was very cautious, especially with a guy like Kyle Pitts last season, is what's the touchdowns going to look like on this team? Are they really going to get a whole lot of touchdowns? Touchdowns are pretty important to players having big weeks, or they can make some of those poor weeks look much, much better. And I don't know how much this offense will be scoring. I'm hopeful about it, but I'm not banking on it for, what is he going as, the 4th running back? It just feels a little bit high to me. There's other guys I'll feel a little more comfortable with. I'm not saying it's not possible that he's a top 5 running back. I'm just not betting on it. Now, round 2, early round quarterbacks in general, not even just early round quarterbacks overall, they're going so darn high in this draft, and I think that's a holdover from best ball drafts. I think that's become so popular that now that drafting style is influencing, once redraft season comes around, how those people are drafting. And this is one thing that just didn't get adjusted for. People who want their quarterbacks aren't willing to risk them falling, and so the ADP has stayed high on them. And so the people who want a quarterback high have been justified in taking a quarterback high, because otherwise somebody else they feel like will take them. First of all, stay water, you adapt. This is the new landscape this season. The quarterbacks are not going to be falling in your draft, whether it's your fault or somebody else's fault. It's just probably not going to be happening in especially most home drafts. So if you're somebody like me and you're a late quarterback drafter, or you like to get some of those mid-quarterback targets, now they're going a round or 2 earlier. The whole position is just tending to go a little bit earlier. And so I think you can feel comfortable going a little bit earlier than you feel comfortable with at the quarterback position overall. But especially these guys going in the 2nd round, that's so rich for my blood. Out of them, I would go with Jalen Hurts over these guys too. So really, my biggest bust here for value of where you're getting the guy would probably be Josh Allen. I would be the most concerned about him. He's the guy most likely to not finish in the top 3 here. I think it's a mistake. My suggestion would be at least to wait until the 3rd round, go Lamar Jackson or Joe Burrow there, or you could get Justin Fields in, I think, the early 5th, late 4th usually. I believe his ADP was the 5th round whenever I made this earlier this week. But he might be rising a little bit here as we get closer and closer to the draft. I will do an ADP risers and fallers video next week if your draft is not this weekend. So I think that's always good information to have. Look for that video going into a draft. Let's move on to round 3 with DK Metcalf. And this list was made, and all of these points were made before the injury of Jackson Smith-Njigba, which I am not overly concerned about, but I am a little bit more concerned than the timeline that we've received wants me to be concerned about. Let's talk about that right now quickly. Jackson Smith-Njigba injury, broken bone, fracture technically, had surgery yesterday, so Tuesday this week. As far as I know, the healing time of bones is usually 6 weeks, not 3 to 4 weeks like Pete Carroll gave us. And Pete Carroll's usually been a terrible source for injury news, so I'm just a little bit worried about that timeline coming from Pete Carroll's mouth. I don't know. I would like to hear some more opinions on this outside of just me. I'm not a medical expert, but I do have some knowledge, and I did Google things, and usually this should be 6 to 8 weeks. I think typically football players especially are able to do it in that 6-week timeline as long as there's no setbacks. And so bone healings are usually pretty straightforward. I'm a little confused on the timeline, but I think worst case scenario, he misses 4 weeks of the regular season, which is not good for where you're going to be drafting him, and I have a hard time pushing him back too far. I did push him back just a little bit because I think that it's going to be that 4 weeks currently, but I don't know if it's just going to be that 3 to 4 week timeline and he's only missing like 1 week or 2 weeks. I wouldn't draft him any differently than you were previously, however you felt about him. So on to DK Metcalf. I would put this closer to the bust category. Not a big bust, but I think he's going a little bit too early. You've probably heard that from me before. He was wide receiver 24 in 2022. That's via my EV system and average fantasy points per week. and he is going as the wide receiver 15 this season. The concern for him doesn't come from his targets or his target share. He was 11th in the league in targets amongst all wide receivers, qualifying wide receivers. He was 18th in the league in target share amongst all qualifying wide receivers. However, his efficiency is what would concern me into him being a top 15 wide receiver. He was easily outside of the top 30 in efficiency. It hasn't been great overall for his efficiency numbers. The addition of JSN, I think, works in a couple of ways. First of all, it's possible that could eat into his target share. I don't necessarily think it will, but he's definitely being drafted like it's a guarantee that it will not. I think it'll come from the tight ends most of all, and maybe just a small sliver from DK and from Tyler Lockett each overall in order to create a target share for JSN. But that's not a guarantee. It could come out of the wide receivers more than I'm even thinking. In addition to that, though, I do have a kind of a counterpoint as to why I might be wrong here, and part of that does have to do with the addition of JSN. That could help the efficiency of DK Metcalf. That could help to open things up, make life easier for him, and if you improve that efficiency and he gets the same targets, then immediately his value goes up. Also, he had 6 touchdowns in 2022. That's definitely a number a guy like him could increase. I also think it's, even if he doesn't increase like his red zone conversion rate into touchdowns, I think this team might see the red zone more, might be a better offense, and that's in part because of the addition of JSN, making it a more well-rounded offense. So you increase the touchdowns, that could go a long ways too. Those are reasons I could be wrong. Let's move on to round 4 with running back Dameon Pierce of the Houston Texans. He was running back 20 in my equalized value system, running back 24 on average fantasy points per week. And I believe that's somewhere around where he is going in drafts. So why don't I like him? Well, he wasn't very efficient last season, and so that's one of the arguments against Kenneth Walker. These are guys who had big splash plays that definitely increased their end results, the production. Not being highly efficient, not a great help, especially when you're on a not so great offense, this Houston offense, which we will get to in a moment. But also, last season, he had a very high usage. I drafted Dameon Pierce with confidence last year. I was high on him all off season, and that's because I expected him to have a high amount of usage. I'm not expecting that to be an insane amount of usage this year. This is a new offensive system. The last one, they had made it clear in the offseason they were going to be grounding and pounding as much as possible, and Dameon Pierce had no competition on the roster. This year, the Devin Singletary effect, he's coming in, and he is going to lower the amount of the team usage that Dameon Pierce is getting, and Dameon Pierce is also, or the Houston offense is also going to be rushing at a lower rate than they were last season. Now, I still think they should be rushing at a fairly high rate, a good, decent rate, because they have a rookie quarterback that they want to bring along, but they also want to bring along that quarterback and develop him as a passer. It is a passing league. I think they know that, and he is a passing quarterback. I believe that it's not going to be as much of a high usage in the run game for Dameon Pierce by a long shot this season compared to last season. Less opportunities equals less chances for those big splash plays. He was a guy who was living off of one play in a lot of games last year. He wasn't a comfortable start as well as he ended up doing for most of the season until the late season came around. And it comes once again to this Houston offense too. The touchdown upside is really not there. It's not a great offense. Let's move on to the 5th round with George Kittle. First of all, he was extremely efficient last season. Now, some of these things are, I think, purposeful and byproducts of this San Francisco offense and the fact that they have, I can't think of his name, and I'm not going to even try, their head coach calling the plays. I don't expect these things to totally get wiped off the board and for him to be inefficient or even average. I still think George Kittle probably going to be above average in efficiency, but he was extremely efficient, and I expect there to be some regression to the mean there this season. He was also number 2 in touchdowns in 2022 amongst all tight ends. Now, that's a number that's not very sticky, and so you would expect some regression to the mean there for sure. When Deebo Samuel, Brandon Aiyuk, and Christian McCaffrey are all healthy, which they were not all healthy last season, George Kittle tends to get used a little bit more as a blocker in those types of games, not as much as the weapon in the receiving game. He'll still get some opportunities, and they might come out of nowhere, and the defense gets caught, and that's where he gets one of these extremely efficient plays that ends in a touchdown. But it happened less last year while they were fully healthy and George Kittle was out there compared to when Deebo or Aiyuk was injured. And the last thing for George Kittle is he is a very high injury risk at this point in his career. He has gotten injured quite a bit, some tough injuries. So via DraftShark's website, he is at a very high injury risk, but I really didn't need a website. I wrote this note and then I Googled it. Something to keep in mind when taking a high-end tight end is they are impossible to replace. You cannot replace those top 1 to 3 tight ends on a season ever. It doesn't happen. On to round 6, we have another San Francisco player in Brandon Aiyuk, and when I got done with this slide, I had wished almost that I went with my original pick, which was Chris Godwin. So this was a very close call between Brandon Aiyuk and Chris Godwin, and I could have switched it back to Chris Godwin, but I stuck with Brandon Aiyuk here. And I will say, we've been in, I would say Dameon Pierce was more of an avoid than a bust. George Kittle, I would say he's a low-key bust for me. Same with DK Metcalf. And then for Brandon Aiyuk, I'm going to put it into the avoid category because of the good. The good for him is that he was wide receiver 22 in 2022. He's going as the wide receiver 28, so right off the bat there, you would think there's some good value, but I will get into the bad. But I do want to comment. I'm going to go over the part of the bad is what he did when Brock Purdy was at quarterback. And if you put these numbers into the same formula that I get wide receiver 22 out of for his performance in 2022, I believe he ended right at where his ADP is, wide receiver 28. I think it was exactly dead on. So I will make that point, but I will counterpoint a point in the bad just to let you know that and be totally transparent about this. This is probably a vibe thing as much as anything because I don't know that the data is 100% supporting me on this argument against Brandon Aiyuk and why I'm avoiding him. Also, for the good for Brandon Aiyuk is the training camp news has been really good on him, very positive. People have noticed him and thought that he's looked quite well. The bad is that with Brock Purdy, this is his output. He had 9 fantasy points, 7.1 fantasy points, 12.7 fantasy points, 2.9, 10.6, 22.2. And so that one big game is definitely helping to weight this into a more positive thing. But I think sometimes you might have higher expectations of what good players look at. Like I said, in my EV system, this was still wide receiver 28. It's not terrible, and consistency is part of the EV system. I will also point out the games without Deebo Samuel, 2 of them are going to be his top 3 games out of a small sample size we're working with here. Out of these 6 games in the sample size, 10.6, 22.2, so the first and the third highest games were without Deebo Samuel on the field. So he did do worse when Deebo Samuel was in, once again, in a small sample size. Moving on to round 7, Michael Pittman Jr. coming up here, and I think we've all heard almost every expert this offseason talk about Michael Pittman Jr. being a bust, and it is no different from me, and he is finally getting taken. Not even finally, it's been there for a little while now. People started listening to the experts on this one and heeding the warning about Michael Pittman this season and why he should not have been going as high as he was earlier on in this offseason in fantasy drafts. This is much closer to a fade, an avoid, than it is a bust, but I'm going to put it still in the bust category by a slim margin. Round 7, Michael Pittman Jr. might be thinking you're getting a value. I don't think that you're getting a value. He has Anthony Richardson as his quarterback. Not a whole lot of quarterbacking experience. There's going to be a pretty healthy learning curve as far as the passing game goes for him. Accuracy was one of the big concerns for him. And although I don't think it was as bad as some people might have painted his accuracy to be, it's also not great. And so that's something that's going to have to come along. And in a system, a year where I think they're going to want to run the ball a lot, you take a low target share, low target totals, more importantly, and you put bad accuracy with that, and you're going to get a very inconsistent guy that you're going to start a few weeks in the season, and if you get lucky, you'll be okay with it. I think okay with it, too. I don't think you'll be super excited about it, but more often than not, what's going to happen to people, I think, is he has a big week, you put him in, and you get nothing from him the following week. Also, his quarterback is a big play quarterback, down the field thrower, and it's not that Michael Pittman Jr. isn't a 50-50 ball guy down the field, but he is not the separator that Alec Pierce is. So I think just like last year, we're going to see Alec Pierce used more in that big play game, and that is definitely going to be a part of where we might see some success come from this offense with Anthony Richardson. And then low-key, if they lose Jonathan Taylor, I don't think this is a good offense at all. I think that really hurts everybody, including Anthony Richardson and his rushing upside, because that would allow defenses to key in on him more. Moving on to round 8, we have Rashaad Penny, and I want to mention, too, Khalil Herbert just made it onto my targets list recently, and here we are, and I almost had him. I actually wanted to put him on this list as in a void-ish kind of guy, a warning out there for Khalil Herbert. Khalil Herbert, is it Herberts or Herbert? Khalil Herbert. Yeah, Khalil Herbert. I just talked very glowingly about him, and basically as I was doing that for the first time, Roschon Johnson was getting onto the field and running with the ones at training camp with his team. So early on in the offseason, I thought Roschon had a very good shot of being the lead back come even as early as week 1. I don't know that it'll be week 1, but it looks like Roschon Johnson is nipping at the heels of Khalil Herbert already. So beware, be concerned to an extent. I'm now not necessarily super confident in drafting Khalil Herbert at this very moment. Now, Rashaad Penny, is he going to be the running back 3 on this team? And if so, he's probably splitting that work a little bit with Boston Scott. This is a crowded backfield. They have a lot of guys that they like. So no matter where he's at, I think we have to be a little bit concerned about all of these guys and how much usage they'll actually get in this offense. At this point in time, Kenneth Gainwell is getting some steam, being talked about as being the RB1, and he did finish last season as the running back 1. That's why I started this offseason, and for most of it have talked about Kenny G in a way of, hey, don't write him off as coming out of this backfield as the RB1, because they used him over Miles Sanders in the playoffs as their essential RB1. And so they like him a lot, and he did good in the playoffs in that role for them. And on top of that concern, you have the injury history concern for Rashaad Penny. Round 8 seems a little rich for my blood for Rashaad Penny with all of the piling on concerns for him going on. Which brings us to round 9. Kadarius Toney is back. I haven't talked about him for a while, but if you heard me talk about him, you probably expected him to make it onto this list. This is a loaded wide receiver room. We really don't know how it's going to end up breaking apart, and I think that there's going to be a lot of moving parts on this offense. I don't think you're going to see the same 3 wide receivers on the field most downs. On top of that, we have Kadarius Toney's injury history, which is part of the reason we haven't been talking about him for a while now. He already got injured in the offseason, and that's been his big bugaboo through his first 2 years in the NFL. And then you have the fact that, is he just a gadget player? He might be, and if he is, although in this offense that could be great, it might be a little unpredictable, and you might miss out on those big weeks. Beware. I'm calling him a bust. I'm straight up just calling him a bust. I would be concerned about him. Now, round 10, we have JuJu Smith-Schuster, and this one's going to be more of an avoid. And that's just, where is the upside here? I do expect him to maybe finish around where he's getting drafted amongst wide receivers, like based on average fantasy points scored and whatnot. But I don't expect that to come in any kind of league-winning way. I just don't quite see it with JuJu Smith-Schuster in this offense. He was wide receiver 38 in 2022, and a much better offense, where he got a 17.4% target share, and he was lined up to be able to demand a high portion of the target share. That's 46th amongst all wide receivers. He just couldn't demand a great target share. Round 11, we're going to get some more Kansas City offensive players, and it comes down to Jerick McKinnon and Sky Moore here. As far as Jerick McKinnon goes, CH is back, and I do think that CH not being there was part of Jerick McKinnon's success. A lot of this is where CH was healthy, at least through, I want to say, 6-7 weeks of this, and then it took a few weeks before, down the stretch, yeah, Jerick McKinnon absolutely went off. But before that, week 1, 6.4 fantasy points, 8.6, 2, 0.5, 8.2, 4.5, 5.8, 7.4, 8.8, 0.9, 4.1, and then he went off. The offense found something that was working, and I think they found something out of necessity because their offense was growing stale because none of the wide receivers that they had brought in or drafted were being anything spectacular as I think that they had hoped them to be. And so they found their little secret weapon down the stretch in Jerick McKinnon, and it worked very well. I don't think that can be a season-long thing, and I don't think that they want to rely on that. I think that they want to rely on their receivers more than their running back out of the backfield. And that brings us to a receiver, Sky Moore. Let's say Jerick McKinnon, I'm going to call a bust candidate. Sky Moore, I'm going to call a bust candidate as well. But I understand taking the risk. I just think that it's a little early still in round 11 to take a risk on these wide receivers. I would much rather take a gamble a little bit later on a Justin Ross or a Rashee Rice, and I think they have nearly as good of odds as Sky Moore of coming out of this and being different, maybe even a higher chance of being a difference maker for your league, a league winner for, at the very least, Justin Ross there, but he might not have a higher chance. Has a higher chance of busting as well. As far as Sky Moore goes, I'm talking about those names. There's other names in that wide receiver room: Kadarius Toney, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Justin Watson, and then of course you have the competition at wide receiver, and you have a guy like Jerick McKinnon that's going to come out of the backfield sometimes. We could very much see this ball get spread around a whole lot once again this season, and I don't believe in Sky Moore. Round 12, Adam Thielen. We're officially, I think, into avoid these aren't busts anymore at this point in the draft. Maybe they haven't been since about JuJu Smith-Schuster even. Round 12, Adam Thielen. Once again, he's a what's the upside guy. I get it. I think he'll have fantasy points. I just don't think he'll have big weeks that are going to help you to win those games. He'll just keep you kind of give you a floor. Rookie quarterback passing to him. Last season, he had one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL passing to him, and he was still wide receiver 41. He had a 17% target share. He was not able to demand a lot of targets. He was 49th amongst all wide receivers, but he was 18th in snap share. He was 22nd in route participation. It's not like he didn't have a chance of doing much better in the amount of targets that he got for the team, but he just couldn't demand that anymore. He was 66th in his average depth of target. It's tough to see the upside here in this new offense, a lesser offense, for a guy who appears to have hit the hill, I guess, of age and athleticism. Hit the hill is not a metaphor, but, gone over the hill for it. Now, in round 13, I have Deonta Foreman. And look, he's not going to be winning this job, that's for sure. I think he's probably the running back 3 for this team. I think he's probably a guy who comes in spells, whoever the lead back is for this offense. Sometimes there's other backup running backs that you should be taking ahead of him, that he's going ahead of, that are going to be on better offenses, though I don't hate this offense. Which brings us to another running back, Kareem Hunt, going in round 14. There's still quite a bit of talent left on the board. Similar thing, there's some guys who I'd much rather take over Kareem Hunt. He was very inefficient last season in 2022, and ultimately, he's still not on a team. Where does he go? I'm sure that he goes somewhere, but teams have largely, determined their fate at the running back position, and now they want to see where that takes them, and so they need some sort of injury to happen in order for Kareem Hunt to find a spot, which, once again, I'm sure that will happen here eventually, but it needs to happen first, and we don't know where that might be, and I don't think it'll be Kareem Hunt gets every carry or anything like that in that situation. The best situation would be Indianapolis trades away Jonathan Taylor, and then they pick up a guy like Kareem Hunt. But he's also not necessarily the best guy in free agency for the running backs right now. He's up there. He's top 2 or 3, but he might not be the one that they would want to bring in. I'm passing up on Kareem Hunt even in round 14. And that's going to bring us to another guy I'm passing up on round 15, Chuba Hubbard. He doesn't excite me. He's the backup in Carolina. What do we expect from this offense? There's other teams' backups that I would rather take a chance on over him. He's going to need a Miles Sanders injury in order to be relevant at all. At least like a guy like Deuce Vaughn might bring some pop to the team, might get himself a legitimate role alongside Tony Pollard, a running back who were concerned about can he hold up to the amount of usage that they might be expecting from him in a week in and week out basis. And Deuce Vaughn, in the event of an injury to Tony Pollard, would be on a much better team, and I think he would split the workload with like Rico Dowdle and get a fair amount of work like Tony Pollard did last season. Then you have a guy like CEH where he might have a bigger role than we're expecting this year, and in the event of an injury to Isaiah Pacheco, he's the guy, not Jerick McKinnon, who would be the lead back. But yes, Jerick McKinnon's role would then probably increase all the more. Zamir White made this list before the good news for Josh Jacobs, so there was good news on his front of him coming back by week 1, some positivity within the organization, but especially, a week ago, a guy like Zamir White should have been going up ahead of him because via injury or via holdout, being the lead back in Las Vegas was pretty profitable last season for fantasy owners, quite profitable. And then Jerome Ford, the Browns, and Josh Kelly with the Los Angeles Chargers. Like, give me those backups over this. I don't know what this hold is that Chuba Hubbard has over people, that they like him so much. I've never understood it. Moving on to round 16 and beyond, one player from each position. We'll start off with Mac Jones. This is a run-first offense. I'd rather take a risk on a guy like Sam Howell, who's going to be in a pass-heavy offense, and I think has looked pretty good. Better than Mac Jones or not, I don't know, but he'll get a lot more opportunities to pass the ball and make some big plays and get touchdowns himself and run the ball than Mac Jones, which are all good things for fantasy. Ryan Tannehill, the experienced veteran, had a down year last year for sure, but I'll take a chance on that over Mac Jones, and Mac Jones is currently going higher than them. That's all. It's, definitely not a bust at this point in time. I actually fairly feel kind of safe with Mac Jones if I need a quarterback late in drafts. For the wide receiver position, we have Zay Jones, and I just expect him, Evan Ingram, to be very unpredictable in this offense this season. And so I expect them to be very frustrating for owners. It's not something that I want to get involved with this year. Then we have Gus Edwards coming in at running back. Now, made this about a week ago. Saw a report that Justice Hill was working his way to being the RB number 2, or maybe that was said in the preseason game. I have not seen another report like that since then. I can't find anything to back that up. I do think that it makes sense within this offense for that to potentially be the truth. It's a different blocking scheme. It's less of a power blocking game as it is a zone blocking game. Justice Hill is more of a one-cut back, whereas Gus Edwards is more of a power back. So it could make sense that whether it's true on the depth chart or not, Justice Hill would be the guy to get more work, especially in the event of an injury. He might be the guy to take over as the lead back role. So I added Justice Hill to my draft chart, and I'm less likely, which I already wasn't highly likely to do, to take Gus Edwards than I was before. I usually have my running backs figured out before the end of the draft, so I'm usually not thinking about taking a guy like Gus Edwards. And last up here we have tight end, rookie tight end. I'm stalling. Michael Mayer, that didn't take too long, who is going quite high in my opinion for a number 2 tight end on a offense that we're not exactly excited about, we're hesitant over, and think to be probably a middling offense, who is playing behind a guy like Austin Hooper, who is not coming out as the prospect of like Dalton Kincaid, who is being treated almost like Kyle Pitts, where it's like, oh, he's a receiver, he's not a tight end. Well, not exactly true, but still, definitely not true in the case of Michael Mayer. He's an all-around talent. He's a blocker. He can catch well. He does well with his route running. He can find the open spots in zones. He can beat some guys through physicality. Like, he does everything above average. But that's kind of where it ends. There's some other guys who I'd rather take over him. I don't have that list available right now. But you can check my rankings if you wish to. All right. That's it. Peace out. Thank you very much for tuning in. I will see you Saturday with a report that will air. And then next week, I plan on releasing quite a few more videos. Maybe a video a day is the goal. So I'll see you then. Peace out. Take care. Good luck with your drafts if you are drafting this weekend. I know I am, and I'm excited about it. Bye-bye.